Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
The Commons Speaker, John Bercow, has ruled out allowing the government to put its Brexit deal to a vote before MPs today. Boris Johnson tried on Saturday to get the green light for his revised withdrawal agreement for the UK to leave the European Union. But MPs backed a move to delay approval. Mr Bercow says to allow another debate today would be repetitive and disorderly, and he rejected accusations from some Tory MPs of bias against the government. Here's our political editor, Laura Koonsberg.
Again, number 10 hasn't got its way. Again, the Prime Minister's plan to make MPs choose overturned. Ministers have been rushing to push things to a conclusion. But is there any chance now we can leave the EU at Halloween?
We've just got to get there, though, haven't we?
Maybe, but that's far from guaranteed.
Are you still confident that we'll be leaving on October the 31st?
Yes, that's what we're working towards.
The government wanted MPs to give a verdict on the Prime Minister's deal with the EU tonight.
Order! I wish to make a statement to the House.
But the Speaker, John Bercow, had other ideas.
Today's circumstances are in substance the same as Saturday's circumstances. My ruling is therefore that the motion will not be debated today, as it would be repetitive and disorderly to do so.
MPs did discuss and vote on the same thing on Saturday, so John Bercow is within his rights to block another vote today. But it's the latest in a long line of his decisions that's annoyed Eurosceptics.
On occasion, you will sometimes have to please some and not others, but it is becoming remarkable how often you please one lot and not the other lot.
When he was getting the decisions in his favour, he wasn't grumbling. He's grumbling now because he doesn't like the judgment. But the judgment I've made is an honourable and fair one.
So there's no yes or no to the Brexit deal tonight. Instead, from tomorrow, MPs will start to go through all the laws that are needed to make our departure from the EU happy. And they might try to remove bits they don't like and add in ideas they do. And it's those amendments that could make the next few days tricky for the Prime Minister.
I think you're likely to see an amendment seeking to put this whole deal back to the British people, because that's actually the way to get Brexit done. You're likely to see an amendment saying we should remain in a customs union. That would help to solve part of the problem on the border between GB and Northern Ireland, where there will now be a customs border.
But just as the Prime Minister would love to get this over with, plenty of MPs believe it's so important they can't be hurried.
We all know that rushed law is bad law, but this isn't just any old law. This is the political rewiring of our country, and it has to be done properly.
But if the government just can't get the agreement through this place, or MPs change the deal so much it's unrecognisable to what was agreed in Brussels, well then Boris Johnson might just say enough and try to push straight for a general election.
I'm concerned about this rotten House of Commons doing all sorts of crazy stuff. I'm deeply concerned about it, and the sooner we have a general election, the better.
Sooner rather than later, a big choice will likely come to us all. But before or after we part ways with the EU is unclear for now. Laura Koonsberg, BBC News, Westminster.
So, what do today's developments in Parliament mean for the Brexit process? Here's our Deputy Political Editor, John Pienaar.
So what now? What's next? Well, the Speaker's upset ministers and Brexiteers again, but frankly at this stage it doesn't matter much. The battle of Brexit is now about the legislation to make Boris Johnson's deal law. So tomorrow MPs will vote on the broad principles of the European Union Withdrawal Bill. Let's call it the Brexit Bill. Lose that vote and for Boris Johnson he's out of road. All that would be left for him is to seek a snap election. Win the vote, and it's just the start of a hard climb in coming days. Time's painfully short if there's to be any chance of hitting that October the 31st Brexit deadline. So there'll be a vote tomorrow on whether to time limit debates. Here they call that a guillotine. And if it's lost, it's hard to see Brexit getting done on schedule, if at all. And win or lose that vote, it'll be on to one battle after another as MPs get stuck into the detail of the Brexit bill. What are the arguments? What will MPs be fighting over? Well, during the detailed debates on the legislation, one of the fights will be between those who want another referendum and those who hate the idea. Plenty of people support a so-called people's vote, and many MPs. But those MPs may not have the numbers they need. Dozens of Labour MPs won't support a referendum they believe would enrage their Leave-supporting constituents. But it may, just may, be the last chance for the People's Vote campaign. What else could change? Well, one vote that could be close, even dangerous for Boris Johnson, will be on whether MPs want the UK in or out of the EU customs union. In, and there'd be no tariffs, border taxes on trade with the EU. But nor could Britain strike its own trade deals outside. And that's a big part of Boris Johnson's Brexit offer. Out, and Britain could strike those deals with countries like America, though critics say we'd still be much worse off. Is an early election coming? Yes, it is. There's a chance Boris Johnson could pull the whole bill if he loses the vote on a customs union. He'd say we're left with Brexit in name only. Then he'd push hard for an early election. He'd likely do that anyway. Of course, his opponents could slam down a vote of no confidence, and if they win that, wrangle about who'd be the Prime Minister to take us into that election. These days and weeks look crucial. I know we keep saying that. Doesn't mean it's not true.
John Pina reporting for us there.
So after more than 3 years of parliamentary wrangling, this week could see the Brexit withdrawal bill go through the Commons in just 3 days, if the government gets its way. The bill will be published later tonight and the debate will start tomorrow. Ministers want it all wrapped up by Thursday. The opposition says it's far too important to be rushed through in that way. Our political editor Gary Gibbon is with me now. Gary, what's going on?
Well, what went on today was that the government was trying to get a meaningful vote on the deal through. The Speaker didn't allow it, but if he had allowed it and they'd managed to win it, they might have been able to rescind the letter they sent to the European Union at the weekend saying that we request a delay to the Brexit date. They hated sending that letter. They stuffed other letters in the envelope a bit, but they fundamentally are a bit like the bits of advertising you throw out of the newspaper into the recycling. They didn't matter. What mattered was the letter. The government is saying the EU won't act on that letter, but they cannot be sure of that at all. And they absolutely hated sending that. So that's what today was about. But tomorrow, there is another chance for Boris Johnson to get a springboard for his deal, because we're going to have the vote in principle on the deal, called the second reading vote. It looks like he's in good shape to win that, and he will be hoping that that will bounce MPs, motivate them to go on and carry on voting victories for his deal. But the second vote that's going to happen tomorrow will be on the timetabling motion, the attempt to try and rush everything through so that we can Brexit on the date that he's been talking about for months and months, the 31st of October. There is a real behind-the-scenes tussle going on over that date. MPs are very uncomfortable about it. They want more time to look at all of this. He's not budging on the 31st of October date, so that could be a moment when actually he loses a vote. But it's not entirely clear whether he would lose other votes. If he was willing to go with a longer process, he might well not lose other votes. So if he can cope with the delay that goes beyond that iconic date, maybe, just maybe, things are turning for him. It's a bit at the moment when you're in here, a bit like looking at one of the end stages of a chess game, when in this case the government appears to be winning, but the other side still have quite a few moves left, but none of them are necessarily going to lead to victory. That's a bit what it looks like, but then of course this is Brexit, not chess.
Brexit is about to come down to knife-edge votes in the Commons. Counting the ayes and the noes for Boris Johnson's deal will start tomorrow, and this deal stands a much better chance of getting approval than Theresa May's 3 attempts.
My reading of it would be that the numbers are there for Boris Johnson now. I don't include me in that, but the numbers are there for a deal.
You accept on the mathematics, on the numbers inside Parliament, he might be moving towards victory.
That may be the case, but I've really learnt to expect the unexpected with this.
There will be a vote in principle on the Brexit deal bill, the second reading tomorrow, and the government is now confident it'll win that, with some Labour MPs helping it over the line.
what sort of Brexit does this House that has been elected back in 2017 want to see? We can't do that unless we get into the debate at committee stage, and so we should support this going through at second reading.
Well, I think people will get quite a shock in here at how many will vote for the second reading of the withdrawal bill. If, as I expect, that's put tomorrow and voted on tomorrow night, it's going to be a lot higher than people realise.
The government had hoped it could kick off a winning streak with a victory today, with a vote on the deal. The Speaker ruled that would be breaking the rule that says you can't browbeat Parliament, putting the same resolution twice.
In summary, today's motion is in substance the same as Saturday's motion, and the House has decided the matter.
It is becoming remarkable how often you please one lot and not the other lot. And can I just alert you and the House, Mr. Speaker, to the fact that my committee will be holding a hearing on the role of the Speaker. It has to be said, somewhat in the light of the experience of recent months.
If the government had been allowed to have the vote it wanted to today and won it, it would have allowed it to withdraw the letter it was forced by law to send the EU on Saturday, requesting a 3-month delay. Boris Johnson's biggest challenge tomorrow might be the timetabling motion he wants to pass to speed up parliamentary debate and exit on 31st October. MPs opposed to that will argue that the Brexit Secretary's confusion today over what the measures really mean underlines how scrutiny must not be rushed.
On your proposals, will Northern Ireland businesses that trade with Great Britain have to complete export declarations?
From Northern Ireland to Great Britain, no, because we've said in terms of from Northern Ireland to GB that it will be frictionless. And so, no, there wouldn't be export.
Even the Union Customs Code, I believe, says that when they leave the customs union, goods do have to complete these declarations.
I would have to come back and write to you on that. Could I also, just come back to Lord Wood, because he asked a very fair question on declarations. Just to be clear, the exit summary declarations will be required in terms of Northern Ireland to GB.
The government insists that EU leaders meeting Boris Johnson last week don't want to grant the delay to Brexit, which MPs forced the Prime Minister to request. Michael Gove told MPs the measure, designed to avoid no deal, made it more likely.
I must, I fear, take the appropriate steps now to prepare for the increased possibility that the legal default position will follow and we will leave on October the 31st without a deal. The clear advice to me from officials is that we must now intensify contingency arrangements.
The government hopes it can ratchet up fears, but some aren't listening.
I can really no longer accept anything that the Prime Minister says to me. I've watched too many examples, even in the last 8 weeks, of a Prime Minister who just tells lies.
When MPs reassemble tomorrow, Boris Johnson will be hoping for a vote that launches his deal on an unstoppable parliamentary journey.
Gary Gibbon reporting. Well, now joining me now is Labour's Caroline Flint, who is defying her party and backing Boris Johnson's deal. Why, Caroline Flint?
Well, I'm backing the deal that's been agreed by 27 members of the European Union and also the United Kingdom. And why? Because I think we've had many, many days now, over 1,200, to respect the outcome of the referendum of 2016 and deliver a deal. And, you know, a few weeks ago, people were saying that was not going to be possible. There is no way that this government could secure a deal with the European Union. They have defied those critics, and now we have something before us, and this week we can get down to the nitty-gritty with the withdrawal agreement bill.
Well, of course, this isn't a new position for you. You backed all the previous deals, and this is said
two
by...
of the previous
two
deals.
of the three, but now you're going to back a fourth.
Yes, and I'm doing that because I promised my voters after the referendum and in the general election of 2017, along with the rest of the Labour Party, that we respect the outcome of the referendum and work for a deal.
But did you promise them also that you would check the economic analysis before you recommended this deal?
Of course, I've been looking at everybody's opinion on what our economy would be like.
Economic analysis.
Yes, I understand about what some of the economic analysis is saying, is that it's not as good as May's deal, but I also think when it comes to our economy and looking forward, there is bound to be a situation, given the changes we're going through, that will have some impact. But the question is that for the short or is it for the medium term?
Well, we won't know. We won't know because Sajid Javid says there's no need to publish any economic analysis. It's not being done. How unbelievable that this thing is going to go through this House in 2 days and there will be no economic analysis as to what effect it will have on your voter. Supposing, in fact, an analysis, if done, was terribly bad for your voters, would you do something about it?
So if I could try and sort of develop my argument and answer the question, John, because you've had quite a long question there, if I may, just take a moment. It is an interesting one, but of course over the last 1,200 days we've had all sorts of opinions put out there. Every time something happens that's not great for the British economy, Remainers come out and say that must be Brexit. Every time something happens that's good for the British economy, there's a really good announcement happening at my local airport tomorrow, people don't mention that in relation to Brexit. The truth is, as many, I would say, more reasonable commentators said, is no one exactly knows what our economy would look like in the future when we leave. What they have said, John, is there could be a slowdown, but we will still grow. But I believe so much that is difficult with our economy is because we haven't had a national government to put some things right. About our productivity, about skills, about investment in techs. And we have to resolve this problem. It is a political problem we have to solve first, and then the economy.
Now, look, the fact is, though, there's been no economic analysis done by the Chancellor of the Exchequer, done by the Treasury, done by civil servants who we can trust. None has been done, and some of it may be very bad. This is said to be a much worse deal than the last three.
And we will have the opportunity,
In 2 days.
One second, we don't know what the programme motion is going to be yet. Tomorrow we will have a second reading of the Withdrawal Agreement Bill. There will be a programme motion. My view is this. 19 Labour MPs not so long ago wrote to the European Union Commission and said you must work night and day to secure an agreement. That's been done. So I expect us in Parliament and the government to work night and day. And if that means working all the way through every weekend, we should do that. And the whole point...
2 days. You've got 2 days to approve this week.
No, why do you say we've got 2 days?
Well, because there's going to be a vote on Thursday on this deal.
So we have got time to talk this through and work through the night as well, and we will have more time down the road. And the other point, John, is this. This is just the headlines of the divorce. It is in stage 2 that we will have the more detailed discussions about trade, security and customs arrangements. And the problem with this debate is it's not an honest one, because people have tried to say that everything's got to be decided before we get to that transition. And what will happen if we get through this bill? We will have 15 months where nothing changes
Caroline
at all.
Flint, thank you very much indeed for joining us. With me now is the Conservative MP Victoria Prentice. She's backing the government's deal and will vote against a customs union, even though she has in the past backed a softer Brexit, and also former Conservative, now Liberal Democrat MP Sam Gyimah, who is in favour of a second referendum and indeed revoking Article 50. Why have you changed your mind?
It's not that I've changed my mind. I voted for a customs union in a series of indicative votes because I've always been very clear that in order to get a deal, we need to vote for something positive, namely a deal or a solution. So
any old deal?
No, not any old deal, any sensible, orderly deal, which has been agreed with 27 other nations. It's not any old deal.
Well, it's said to be a much worse deal than the last three.
It is the deal that looks as if it has sufficient votes to get through this democratically elected parliament. It got approval from the EU 27. Quite frankly, that's good enough for me.
So it's fine, Sam Gyimah, it's time to go on now. It's time to move on. We've had enough of this. It doesn't matter really what the deal is.
I think that's completely the wrong way to look at it. What the government is doing is it's weaponizing the fact that people are understandably bored and want to move on.
Well, that's true.
But the outcome is also material here. What we have in front of us is a constitutional treaty that will affect our lives for decades to come. And we have a government that is giving us minimal amount of time to scrutinize it, a government that has signed up to a deal that Theresa May, who Boris Johnson claimed was weak, rejected. It was the EU's opening offer, and this is now being presented to Parliament as some kind of negotiating masterstroke.
But look, even the CBI have swung in behind this deal.
Well, I mean, I know that companies, I don't know what exactly the CBI said, but companies employing 1.1 million people in the manufacturing sector, the pharmaceutical sector, the chemical sector, have said this deal does not work for them. I was a Conservative, and I know that what the Conservative Party wants is the loosest possible relationship with the EU, and that will damage jobs, And that would be a far cry away from what was promised in the referendum. But they know that is the only thing they can do if they want to defeat Nigel Farage. That is what is driving them.
That's certainly not what I want. What I want is a really good relationship with our friends and neighbours in the EU, but I think that's impossible to achieve unless we leave in an orderly way with a deal. So we have to do a deal positively. It's not just a case
so
of
would
saying
you be
no
open
to
to a
everything.
customs union, which you used to support? I mean, if in fact they say, look, we'd love a deal in which we have a customs union, that'll mean no tariffs between us.
But John, I don't think you can get that through this House. We have to get the synergy.
Again, the reason is the Conservative Party will not accept that because they want the hardest form of Brexit.
Well,
What we're saying as a
excuse me,
Liberal
Sam, I'm
Democrat
still a Conservative MP. You're not.
No, I know the Conservative Party.
So do I, and I'm in it. And that's not at all the position is, my position. The position is that we have to get the deal through this House. We have been elected to do that. People are not just fed up, they're frightened and worried about the prospect of more uncertainty.
But what a terrible reason to do anything. If people are frightened, surely the thing to do is to start again or perhaps abandon it altogether.
People are frightened because politicians have not been honest with them of how complicated and how long this process will take. The 31st of October deadline, which Boris Johnson decided to fetishize, was his choice. This is always going to take long. I think the way to move forward and gain closure is if Boris has got a deal and he believes in that deal so much, allow the people to have a final say.
Well,
if this is what they
there is a big problem, and that, in the words of my political editor, is that you've run out of chess pieces. Your checkmate, it's all over.
No, I heard him when he said that, and I said, actually, what Parliament could do in the next week is kick the chessboard completely away.
I think it's very simple. As Caroline said, we voted 3 years ago, more than 3 years ago, to leave the EU. I might not have been in agreement with that, Sam might not have been in agreement with that, but that is what the people decided. If we are Democrats, we absolutely have to deliver that decision.
But if you're a Democrat, surely you have to tell the people the truth about the deal.
Completely, I agree with you.
Sajid Javid says there is no need for economic analysis. Heaven preserve us. I mean, he's the Chancellor of the Exchequer.
There will be a lot of time, as Caroline said to you a few minutes ago, to scrutinise the details of the future arrangement. We have got years ahead of us. I wish I could say that this was the end of Brexit, but it isn't. But we have to get this stage done.
You're essentially asking Parliament to give Boris Johnson a blank cheque in the name of respecting the referendum. But what we know is Boris didn't agree with Theresa May's deal. Nigel Farage doesn't agree with Boris Johnson's deal. So when we say we are respecting the referendum result, which deal are we talking about? And that is why it's essential to give the people choice.
Which deal do you think we are talking about? Because honestly, you wouldn't know if you were in here.
I think what we're doing is starting the process. I'm really sorry for all of those that are bored by Brexit, but this is not the end. If we manage to get this deal through Parliament,
but
which I really hope we will.
Get Brexit done, you delude the British people into believing, it'll all be done on Tuesday, Thursday when the vote is.
The beginning will be done, which is a long way further than people like me, I accept. I didn't know that Boris could manage to do this deal. I am thrilled that he has managed to do this deal.
Your predictions?
My predictions, we will pass second reading. I very much hope that we'll pass the programme motion.
My prediction is he'll struggle to get this through the House.
He will struggle?
Yes.
Sam and Gina, Victoria Prentice, thank you both very much. Delightful to talk to you. Matt, it's your turn now in the studio.
Thanks, John. Well, while politicians haggle, as you just heard, about Boris Johnson's deal, many businesses are asking, if it passes, what will it mean for them? The Chancellor, Sajid Javid, is obviously confident, but not everybody is sold. Minnie Stevenson reports from Walsall on the uncertainty felt by many business leaders over what exactly they will face if the deal goes through.
This family manufacturing business in the West Midlands makes household fixtures and fittings. Trading since 1868, they know all about playing the long game. But while there was much noise of a Brexit breakthrough, a lack of progress in Parliament has taken the sheen off Boris Johnson's deal on the factory floor.
Well, I think this morning is quite typical of previous Monday mornings where there's no real movement forward. It's a feeling of frustration. We got to kind of Super Saturday where everybody said, OK, this is the key day, we're going to move on now. And more frustration. We look at Parliament for somebody will lead by example, somebody will build confidence in the country, providing kind of, a stability that we can work with, and that's just not what we're getting.
For businesses, the vast majority of the new 600-page deal is very similar to Theresa May's, but under closer inspection there are key differences which continue to emerge. The previous agreements to pay the £33 billion EU divorce bill and guarantee of citizens' rights stay under Boris Johnson's deal. And while there will be no customs checks at the Irish border, instead, goods arriving in Northern Ireland will require customs forms and may have duty charged in case they are moved onto the Republic of Ireland. And in a blow to business, today it emerged in a government hearing that the same rule would apply for companies in Northern Ireland sending goods to the rest of the UK. Something that seemed to confuse even the Brexit secretary.
If they're going, well, if they're moving goods to Northern Ireland, they're not exporting.
From Northern Ireland to Great Britain.
From Northern Ireland to Great Britain, no. Just to be clear, the exit summary declarations will be required in terms of Northern Ireland to GB.
So that's more red tape in both directions then. Now, of course, if Boris Johnson's deal does pass, then for businesses like this who trade with Northern Ireland, they could face a new, costly and complicated customs process just to get their goods into Northern Ireland. So while the vast majority of businesses may have welcomed this new deal based on the principle that any agreement is better than no deal, it seems to be this increased red tape and the lack of certainty about what the trade deal will look like at the end of that transition period in 2020, which is still leaving many feeling unhappy.
The withdrawal agreement is just that. It doesn't solve the problems going forward of fleshing out a new economic relationship with Europe. And even if we're talking a limited free trade agreement of the Canada-EU variety, bear in mind that agreement took 8 years to negotiate, and a trade agreement between the European Union and Japan, which may be of a similar scope that we're contemplating, it took 9 years.
Of course, the government argues there is time to secure a trade deal with the EU, avoiding a cliff edge in 2020. But there's tension over the regulations businesses will follow in the future. In Boris Johnson's agreement, keeping rules in line with Europe is an ambition, not a legal requirement, with some critics feeling standards will be eroded. Meanwhile, minutiae aside, many here are suffering from Brexit fatigue.
We should be out of it by now. Instead of keep dragging it on and dragging it on, what they're playing at? What we're paying them for? Just sitting on the backsides.
I feel let down again by MPs, big style.
Oh my God, I just want it to all end. When is it going to all end?
Life or Brexit?
Brexit.
OK. And that's just how business is feeling too, desperate for certainty, something which is still in short supply.
Minister Stevenson there. Well, we're now joined by Francis O'Grady, the General Secretary of the TUC, and by Mark Littlewood of the free market think tank, the Institute of Economic Affairs, which has been arguing for lower taxes and fewer regulations for decades. Welcome to you both. Let me start with you, Mark. I mean, a bit odd, isn't it? The Chancellor of the Exchequer, the man in charge of the money, saying we don't need an impact assessment because we have no need for it because we know about the benefits of this deal. They're self-evident.
Well, I think the problem there is if you believe that there is some objective truth out there and a bunch of civil servants and economists, however well-meaning, can give you the absolute hard facts of exactly what GDP will be.
Well, they might give you a range of numbers to deal with.
Well, I mean, I'd allow civil society to have those sort of arguments. I think we've been arguing for 3.5 years about whether this is going to work or not, and sincere people of good faith take very different views on it. There's no objective truth out there.
But sincere people of good faith who run businesses also want some degree of certainty. So a couple of numbers out there concocted by people who've got the research available would be helpful, wouldn't it?
I'm not sure how much it would help businesses. What they want to know is what sort of rules and regulations they're going to face in the short term, the medium term and the long term. And it's only really the short term that you can guide them on. We don't know what government will be under in 2 years' time, 5 years' time, 10 years' time.
That is a fair point, isn't it, though? Because we don't even know what kind of trading relationship we're going to fashion with the European Union. So any assessment done today will be, irrelevant or outdated by, sometime next year.
Well, this matters. This matters to people's jobs, their livelihoods and their rights at work. And the nearest assessment we've got from the government's own advice is that a free trade agreement would shrink the economy by up to 6%. That means manufacturing would take a hit, jobs and livelihoods and wages would take a hit. And of course, we also know that the government wants to abandon any notion of a level playing field on workers' rights. And that's about, I'm afraid, a licence to rip up workers' rights.
That is a fair point, isn't it? I mean, big businesses, like the businesses that you represent...
I don't represent any businesses.
But you're paid for by businesses, aren't you?
Well, we're paid for mainly by individual donors, actually.
And they have a lot to benefit from the kind of lack of regulation that you like to see as a result of this change in...
Well, listen, you might be of the view that the European Union is a regulatory nirvana, that it has perfectly calibrated every single rule in the interest of the British economy. Or you might take the view, and this would be my approach to it, let's look at the rule book. I mean, we don't automatically have to abandon any of these rules by leaving. Brexit is neutral on that point. The question is, I think we should methodically go through them and say, are they fit for purpose? And I think it would be a strange conclusion if we actually decided that every jot, dot and comma of EU regulation we're inheriting is perfect.
I asked Michael Gove last Thursday, we asked whether he would guarantee that workers' rights would keep pace in Britain. He was not prepared to give us that guarantee.
But that's a question for a general election.
I asked him, well, I'm afraid there are people wondering what's going to happen to their parental leave, to their rights to consultation on TUPE and redundancy, unfair dismissal. We want to know if that level playing field is guaranteed, legally binding.
And you will hold this government to account at the polls.
Well, we will hold them to account now because this matters for people's livelihoods.
Sure, and that's a matter
and
for
talking about it
debate.
in abstract, I'm afraid, just doesn't cut the ice.
It should be discussed between the political parties. People
well,
have different views on what those rights should be.
But we're very sure that this is a bad deal for working people, and MPs should vote against it.
Okay, but just to be clear, Mark, you want to see as little regulation as possible. You want, therefore, you don't like.
Less. I'm not sure I'd say as little as possible. I wouldn't burn the entire rule book.
And who are you? I mean, who would benefit from this? And are any of the people who would benefit from this pouring money into your organisation?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, that's not why we argue for lower regulations. We're sincere free market liberals. I mean, I'll give you an example. I think a lot of the rules around financial services, whilst well-intentioned, actually benefit the incumbents rather too much. It's rather difficult for new challenger businesses to actually tackle and challenge the long-standing rich incumbents.
So just for reasons for clarity here and transparency, who actually backs your think tank?
We have about £2.5 million a year. We get about 23% of that from FTSE 350 companies, the overwhelming bulk from individual donors, donations anywhere from 10 quid up to £100,000.
Care to name any individual donors?
Well, we respect their right to privacy. Some of them are listed in our publications. I mean, we had events sponsored at some of the party conferences and their names were
let's fan out to the bigger picture. What is your vision for the future of Britain after this Brexit year?
Well, I would like us to move slowly but surely to a lower tax, less regulated economy. And that will be a domestic political debate. I think Francis would prefer taxes and spending to go up, wishes to keep regulation in place, probably wants tighter regulations. And it's legitimate for people to argue about that in political discourse. And the ballot box at general elections will determine who prevails on a 5-yearly basis.
This is about a deal for generations of workers ahead. And so I think it's only right that, yes, we respect the result, but we should also respect the people and let them have the final say on this deal, because it's our lives and our children's lives who will be affected. And I'm afraid the way it currently looks, it looks like workers will pay the price.
But will they pay the price? I mean, if this deal generates more investment, generates more business, therefore generates more jobs, there's nothing to say that those jobs will necessarily be bad jobs.
The Leave campaign promised us frictionless trade with what is our nearest and biggest single market. Clearly, as we've heard tonight, even the DUP now saying we've got a border down Ireland, never mind anywhere else, that's going to make trade slower and more expensive, and that hits jobs, especially
that is true, isn't it? It's all about getting less red tape, and that's what you want to see. We're going to have more red tape between Northern Ireland and Great Britain. We're going to get an awful lot of tape from the EU with all these goods that come in, and businesses will have to prove that those goods aren't going to end up in the single market.
That's true. And I'm not claiming that this deal is perfect. It's far from perfect. It's a question of trade-offs and balances here. Yes, solving what we do around Northern Ireland is extremely difficult. The question is whether you have confidence that in the years ahead, not just in the days ahead, British governments will legislate more sensibly than the European Union does. And I am confident in that regard.
I think this
The
is
leap of faith which many people aren't prepared to take.
Incredibly
It's a leap of faith
naive.
either way.
This is about a deal with Trump,
Right.
who has got his eyes on the NHS and our public services. Big Pharma funds
I don't
him.
think anyone's going
We
to
know
sell the NHS
exactly
to
where
Donald
his
Trump.
interests.
Got to leave it there. Francis O'Grady, Mark Littlewell, thanks very much indeed.
Love it or loathe it, the Brexit bill has the power to change Britain's political wiring forever. Yet MPs will have just 3 days to decide if they like what it says. They were given their first full sight of it tonight, some 2 hours ago. So without apology this evening, we'll delve into what it tells us and see if anyone's changed their mind, either way, from what they've read so far. Earlier, the Brexit Secretary, Steve Barclay, clarified one point of contention over trade arrangements. He confirmed that Northern Ireland businesses sending goods to Great Britain would have to complete export declaration forms, a discrepancy that's left the DUP party furious. This bill's in danger of splitting the union. We'll be looking at the detail and the decisions with MPs from across the House. First, James Clayton lays out the extraordinarily complicated timetable of the days ahead.
So, what's the plan? Right.
Boris Johnson's plan is simple. Introduce the Withdrawal Agreement bill in the House, win the votes needed in the Commons.
The ayes have it. Unlock.
Hope the bill isn't amended.
It should be subject to a referendum.
And the Lords don't try and block it. And the EU Parliament agrees to it. And if all of that happens, then sorted. We leave on the 31st. But hold up just a second. Boris Johnson has spent the last few months constructing a narrative of Parliament against the people. Less than a month ago, his Attorney General said this.
This Parliament is a disgrace.
Yup, that's the same Parliament that Boris Johnson now has to rely on to get his Brexit deal through by the 31st of October. That's because the Prime Minister has to turn his deal into UK law. That means getting a bill, aptly named the Withdrawal Agreement Bill, through Parliament in just 10 days. The first issue is that is not long, particularly when the bill is highly contentious. It took 25 sitting days over 5 months to ratify the Lisbon Treaty. A vote tomorrow called a programme motion will set out the time period for which the bill can be debated in the House. The government announced tonight they want it through the Commons by
Thursday, the 24th of October, conclusion of proceedings on the European Union Withdrawal Agreement Bill.
If a majority of MPs think that's not enough time to scrutinise the bill, they could vote to delay. Also tomorrow, MPs will vote at second reading on the bill itself. The government believes it has the numbers to get past this stage. If Mr Johnson wins, then the bill will go into what's known as committee stage. It's the first of a number of phases when the bill can be amended. MPs will attempt to add provisions for, say, a customs union with the EU. Those amendments are likely to be voted on, and the numbers could once again be incredibly tight. Adding amendments around a customs union, a much closer relationship to the EU than the one envisioned by Boris Johnson, could even result in the Prime Minister withdrawing support for his own bill. And then there's the Lords. What will they do?
Well, the House of Lords is very, very hot on procedure and on constitutional propriety and on legal detail. The last bill that we had, the EU withdrawal bill, was poured over in enormous detail in the House of Lords. And if it's rushed through the Commons, the Lords will want to look at it properly. And there are no programme motions in the Lords. So even if they rush it through the Commons, it could get stuck in the Lords for quite a long time.
The Prime Minister's breakneck schedule, getting everything done by next Thursday, is going to mean long sitting hours, debates that run into the night, and knife-edge votes. Boris Johnson has a plan, but it's far from foolproof.
That was James Clayton. So the main business of the voting will happen tomorrow and go on late. What do we now know of the deal itself? Our political editor, Nick Watt, is here. We just got our copies of it. The MPs are digesting theirs. What's the atmosphere amongst people reading it?
Well, I've just come from Parliament where every MP is walking around looking very carefully at the bill. I bumped into a shadow minister who had to rush in to get their amendment down because you can't do it by email. You've got to do it physically. Now, there was a big gulp from Brexiteers when they turned to page 1 of this bill because it has what they regard as the hated European Communities Act of 1972. That is the act that took us into the EEC, and then it affirmed the primacy of EU law in the UK. Now, that goes on the day that we leave, but then on day one, the next day of the transition, the 14-month planned transition, it comes back, it's resurrected. The word is, it is saved. But you look further in the bill and you will see that there's a clause there asserting the sovereignty of the UK Parliament. That is the work of the veteran Brexiteer, Sir Bill Cash. So on that one, they're reasonably happy.
And in terms of what happens tomorrow, it's a long day.
Yes, well, there are these two crucial votes. As James was saying, there's the second reading vote, which is the broad principles of the bill. It looks like that will go through because there are enough Labour MPs to help that on its way. But there are problems with this. This is the programme motion that means that this bill, massive piece of legislation, can only be considered over 3 days. There is a feeling that the government really could be in trouble on that one. I was talking to a former senior member of the Whip's office. Their prediction is that Boris Johnson will lose that vote. Interestingly, Keith Simpson, a bit of a grandee, normally quite loyal, he says, watch that vote. If Boris Johnson loses that, then he is scuppered. Great strategic thinking in number 10. Now, interestingly, I was talking to a DUP source tonight. They said they are going to vote against that programme motion. They are going to vote against the second reading, and they are going to vote in every single way to amend this bill to make it more uncomfortable for Tories, because they're saying you need a bit of the taste of the medicine that we've had to put up with. Why are they upset? Because of those customs checks between Great Britain and Northern Ireland and their fear that Boris Johnson watered down the democratic consent on that. Now, their mood was not helped today by what they regarded as a less than commanding performance on this one issue by Steve Barclay, the Brexit Secretary.
Will Northern Ireland businesses that trade with Great Britain have to complete export declarations?
If they're going, well, if they're moving goods to Northern Ireland, they're not exporting.
From Northern Ireland to Great Britain.
From Northern Ireland to Great Britain, no, because we've said in terms of from Northern Ireland to GB that it will be frictionless. Could I also, sorry, just come back to Lord Wood, because he has a very fair question on declarations. Just to be clear, the exit summary declarations will be required in terms of Northern Ireland to GB.
That was quite a rapid clarification, Nick. How is this and the DUP votes and the amendments going to play out for the rest of the week?
Well, if Boris Johnson loses the programme motion, he doesn't lose the bill, but he loses the ability to timetable the bill, and there's a possibility that he could just pull it at that point and then say, let's have a general election. But if it does go ahead, there are going to be attempts to amend it in lots of ways, but there's absolutely 3 key areas. The first is to have a second referendum. Now, sources in the shadow cabinet, they think that the numbers on that one are moving away from them. The second one is to have a customs union. That would be to give the Prime Minister a mandate to make the negotiation of that a priority in the future trading relationship negotiations. That is very, very difficult to get through, because Downing Street is making clear to Conservative MPs and ex-Conservative MPs that if you go for that, you are wrecking the bill. Labour thinks that they may have greater hope on ensuring that you could have a parliamentary lock to ensure that you don't have a no-deal exit when the transition is due to come to an end in December 2020, if by that point they haven't negotiated a free trade arrangement. There is a hope that what we've seen in recent weeks is there is a stable majority to stop a no-deal Brexit, and hopefully they could use that argument there. The crucial thing, though, is you'd have to act on that by the 30th of June.
Yeah. OK, Nick, thanks very much. Well, that's the timetable and it's a short one. Let's go to our guest. Meanwhile, the Chancellor declared an impact assessment of the deal on the economy unnecessary, saying the benefits were self-evident. So what exactly does the deal do? Here are 2 MPs you'll recognise who were ministers in government just a year ago. Steve Bryan turfed out the party, but now very much behind the Johnson deal. Sam Gyimah, now a Lib Dem spokesman on industry, I think, isn't it? Business and industry. It's unfair to ask how much you've read of this, Steve, but you must have started. You're going to vote for it. You like what you've seen.
I'm in the first quarter
of
reading it. Look, it's not ideal, is it, to get it the night before a big debate and a big vote like this. At the end of the day, MPs, though, Parliament has put itself in this position. If it had agreed to Theresa May's deal, as I voted for 3 times earlier this year, we wouldn't be in this position. And Nick is dead right. The programme motion is where the action is. I don't know the numbers on the second reading itself, but if I remember back to when we were both Conservative MPs in the Cameron's first government, it was Lord's reform that fell, and it fell on the programme
Do you know,
motion.
I promised our viewers that we'd actually look at the substance in here, so I'm going to take you through some of the stuff. The Brexit Secretary himself clearly didn't understand a key part of the bill, had to correct himself, which is that Northern Ireland businesses sending goods to the UK mainland will need to fill in paperwork as if it was an export. It seems remarkable he didn't understand that, doesn't it?
It was a remarkable clip you showed. So yes, they remain within the GB customs area, as I understand it. But I think ministers tomorrow, when they come to the House, will be put under quite a lot of pressure about that. And there was an urgent question today around Northern Ireland business, and the Northern Ireland Secretary was asked about it as well. And I think that, you know, when the Prime Minister and the Brexit Secretary come to the House tomorrow, they're going to have to clarify on that, because I think there's going to be a lot of people in the House who want to ask that question. Unionists are very unhappy tonight.
I mean, the DUP, we know, have been solidly against this for that reason. You yourself left government, you left the Conservative Party because you were opposed to no deal. I don't know if you got to part 4 yet, but there's nothing in here that removes the concern of no deal within the next 14 months. So do you forget that now?
You're right. I did leave the job I loved in government over no deal, because I just don't think in a peacetime situation it's in the national interest to leave with no deal, and that's why I supported the Ben Burt Act last month. But for me, the Ben Burt Act's job was done when the Prime Minister came forward with a new deal, and the only way you can avoid a no deal scenario is to have a deal. I'm sorry to be boring and what Theresa May used to say many times, but that is true. This is a deal. It's a withdrawal agreement. That's all it is. It's a divorce agreement, and they've got to now get this through.
I'm just going to spell
Otherwise,
this out. This is in the deal that you're signing up to tomorrow. The fact that your Brexit Secretary doesn't understand how the paperwork works, the fact that you probably haven't understood that this still leaves no deal on the table in 40 months' time, the fact that the Chancellor himself declared an impact assessment of the economy not necessary because the benefits were self-evident. How can you look at yourself in the mirror and say, I'm signing up to that in 2 days' time?
So it's not my Brexit Secretary. I'm an independent MP. I get the
You're signing up to
the benefit. I said on Saturday that I would support the meaningful vote if we'd had a meaningful vote. I reserve my judgment. I will read this, and I will read it. It's going to be a late night, and I will read it tomorrow morning as well before the debate, and I will try and speak in the second reading debate. I return to the point. You cannot avoid no deal completely. You either revoke...
When you say you reserve your judgment, just to clarify, you might not vote in favour of this.
Absolutely reserve the right to reserve my judgment as to how I'm going to vote in the House of Commons. I'm an independent MP. I have absolutely the right to do that. So I will read it in as much detail as I possibly can. But to go back to your point...
Because what you've read so far gives you nerves.
Yeah, it does give me nerves, and some of the stuff that I'm hearing gives me nerves. But I will sit there in the House tomorrow, and I will listen to what people say, and I will make a judgment. I'll make an intervention. I'll make a speech if I can catch the speaker's eye. But so this is the withdrawal agreement. But then you've got to look on to the future relationship, and the idea that in 12 months' time we'll be sitting here and the House of Commons will just sit back and blithely say, well, we had the future relationship that was passed at the time of the WAB, the Withdrawal Agreement Bill, and just let that happen. The House of Commons will intervene into that situation. It probably won't be the same House of Commons that it is now. It'll almost certainly be a different House of Commons. It may even be with a different Prime Minister, but it will insert itself into that argument, and rightly so, and I hope that I'm in there to do that.
What Steve is, I guess, proving is that 3 days isn't going to be nearly long enough to come to an understanding of what is truly in this bill. But you've already decided, Sam. You know it's no.
Well, the timetable has been designed to protect the deal and the bill from any kind of proper scrutiny by the House of Commons. Now, as far as what I've seen of the deal is concerned, I think it's wrong because it breaks up the union, it's bad for jobs, but it's also delayed no deal, as you've pointed out. I actually think there are more horrors lurking in this deal, and the reason why we need more time to scrutinise it isn't because I've made up my mind at all. We need to make sure that people like Steve, who are minded to vote for it, really understand the implications here. The only reason why you vote for this deal is because you're on the Conservative side and you're putting the Conservative Party interest first.
You know that argument would be far more convincing if you weren't now with a party that had basically thrown the Democrat side of your name out and said, come on, we just want to get it off the table.
You clearly don't believe that. The Liberal Democrat position is still that what we want to give the people a final say. Now, if Boris Johnson is really convinced that this deal is the best deal for our future, he shouldn't be afraid to put it to the British people.
So
can I just finish? Because we've got a situation where Boris didn't like Theresa May's deal, Nigel Farage doesn't like Boris's deal. Which form of Brexit really is the one that people voted for?
You, as a spokesman for your party now, because the Lib Dems will have a critical role in what happens now. If there is an amendment in favour of the customs union, would the Lib Dems sign up to it?
Well, we support a customs union as part of being members of the EU.
OK, that's not the same thing. If the bill is amended, if an amendment is brought which includes a customs union, just tell me if the Lib Dems will be on side.
We will look at it seriously, or we should look at it. But if what people are doing is amending the political declaration rather than the withdrawal agreement itself, I doubt it's worth what is written, the paper is written on, because what Boris Johnson...
What if they're amending the withdrawal agreement?
I think we'll look at it seriously.
That's the key point that Sam makes there. The withdrawal agreement and the future relationship are completely different. So the idea, what we're doing here, what this is this is a draft treaty. This is a treaty that Britain, UK, has agreed with a foreign power, in this case the EU, and it is our job to either ratify that into domestic law or not. Right. We can't just suddenly decide ad nauseum, oh, well, we'll stick a customs union in there.
Well, there are going to be an amendment. We're going to see that.
Yeah, and we'll just and the chair will have to decide how in scope and how in order they are.
But forgive me, Steve, I'm just asking because we know that Sam's party is in favour of a second referendum at this point. You would presumably back a second referendum amendment. I'm asking if there were a compromise that involved an amendment for a customs union, would you, the Lib Dems, as a party, that's 20 people, whatever, sign up?
If you support being in the EU, you support a customs union, you support a single market. If there's a customs union amendment, it depends on what form it is. Does it come with a referendum or not? That's why I said we have to look at it. But ultimately, when you're looking at any of these amendments, what Boris Johnson wants is that all of these amendments are stuck into the political declaration, which he can get rid of further down the line, and not in the withdrawal agreement itself. And that is not worth... So what he's effectively encouraging people to do is to give him a blank check. Hopes to get a majority down the line and he can get rid of anything he doesn't want. The Conservative Party is committed to hard Brexit. That is why this is no deal delayed, because the politics of the first 6 months of next year is that Boris Johnson will have to decide, does he want an extension to the transition? He's already said no.
I'm just going to go back.
And he will not sign up to any of this.
Steve, I'm just going to go back to where we are with the Chancellor's word. He said an impact assessment isn't necessary because the benefits were self-evident. And he said you cannot measure this bill solely through spreadsheets or impact assessments. Now, you've been a minister in government. When you read a phrase like that, somebody who's essentially saying, let's not let ourselves get too tied down by facts and figures, do you have faith in that government?
Well, look, he needs to speak for himself.
No, you're an MP and you're going to be voting for this deal.
I'm not a member.
Or not.
Well, I'll answer it. I think it's shocking that Her Majesty's Treasury is asking us to put blind faith in a deal that will determine our future for years to come. I thought the Treasury was the place that depended on analysis and evidence.
But let's just challenge the idea that what goes through this week, if it goes through in the future relationship, is the end of the story. It's not, because the so-called Nandy Snell provisions, which are in there, and I've looked at them, they're towards the end of the bill, talk about the different parliamentary locks that have to be in place, whereby Parliament can approve the negotiating
You're looking at a bill
now
that says, for example, non-regression of workers' rights. I'm going to read you this line. It makes a statement to the effect that although the minister is unable to make a statement of non-regression, Her Majesty's government wishes the House to proceed with the bill. This is literally in the bill now, an explanation that they can't actually provide an explanation of what's going to happen to workers' rights. I mean, that's horrifying, isn't it?
I will do my best to push on this tomorrow, as I suspect will a lot of Labour MPs, because the Prime Minister was asked by Greg Clark, who's a former Conservative MP like me, during the sitting on Saturday, whether he could guarantee that there will be lesser workers' rights in this country than the EU. And the Prime Minister came back with a very quick answer, yes, I can. So I think we need to hold him to that, and that's what you do during Parliamentary scrutiny, is you push to that. Now,
you can, then you leave it in the...
Isn't it the case that everything that would make Brexit soft is not in the legally binding treaty? The only things that are in the legal binding treaty are what make this a hard Brexit stroke no deal, and that is what you'll be voting for.
And that's why you need good people like you and me, Sam, in the next Parliament to make sure that we steer the future relationship in where we want it to be.
We've run out of time.
We can agree on that.
Thank you. If the Prime Minister struggles to get his bill through Parliament, what happens next depends heavily on the feeling in Europe. Despite repeatedly pledging he wouldn't, Boris Johnson sent a letter on Saturday requesting a Brexit extension, something he was required to do by the Benn Act. So what will Brussels do now? Just before we came on air, we heard from Sophie in 't Veld, the former deputy to Guy Verhofstadt, member of the European Parliament. I started by asking her what she made of the activity in the UK Parliament on Saturday.
The margins are so narrow that you really wonder if this is the way such things should be decided.
The government itself has called it a rotten parliament. From where you're sitting, does it look like Parliament's fault?
No, it cannot possibly be Parliament's fault because, you know, the Parliament has been elected by the people. They're representing their constituents, so by definition, it's not their fault. I think where the problems began is that the referendum was called without anybody having any idea what the Brexit actually was and what kind of Brexit they were asking for. The British political system is basically broken, and it's a system which is not equipped for this kind of very complex situations.
If the withdrawal agreement gets amended this week, it would have to go back to the EU for legal approval. Would it get your consent?
I have some serious, objective question marks apart from all the other political issues on the table. For example, how workable will the arrangement be with, with the new border? And so we will have to look at it in a serious manner because it will have massive implications and it's not something that we should decide lightly.
Our Brexit Secretary revealed just today that Northern Ireland businesses sending goods to Britain would have to fill out exit declarations, i.e. more paperwork, more forms. Did you know that? Would you call that frictionless trade?
Well, no, we didn't know it because we haven't yet, debated all the details of the new deal, the proposed deal. I would not call that frictionless trade. And I think it was clear all along that if you want really frictionless trade, then the best deal you can get is being inside the European Union. I think, but this is my personal view, that having a people's vote, I think, is in everybody's interest, because whatever will happen, whether there will be a Brexit, next week, or whether there will be a Brexit sometime later, or whether there will not be any Brexit at all, I think if you have a people's vote, then at least nobody will have the feeling that their vote was stolen from them. Even if you're a die-hard Brexiteer, then you should have the confidence that people are going to be convinced by your arguments. And if not, then maybe your arguments aren't convincing.
I guess that's your personal view. I mean, from the EU perspective, would they rule out an extension that would be a long one with those kinds of conditions attached for a democratic event?
Ultimately, if it comes down to it, then the government leaders are not going to pull the plug, and they will probably grant an extension. But there may be some criteria saying, okay, we'll grant an extension, but then we have to be reassured that there will indeed be a major democratic event like an election or a people's vote or a referendum. The European Parliament has decided that we will not vote until we have clarity from the UK, that is, until a deal may have been approved by the British Parliament. We will not vote until then. So it's basically in the hands of British politics and the British people.
I guess, but it's also in the hands of the EU, isn't it? I mean, if they grant a short extension only, then there is absolutely no way that there will be a second referendum or a democratic event, let's say.
No, it's not for us to decide whether or not there should be a second referendum. I mean, I have my views, and I think many people here share those views, but it's not for us to say.
Sophie in 't Veld, thank you very much indeed.
A pleasure.
Sophie in 't Veld there. Now, the biggest cliche of the financial world is that the markets, business, hates uncertainty. It might be true, But it's pretty unsurprising. Some might ask, when has there ever been long-term certainty? Others would tell you it's hard to think of a period when so much has been up in the air for so long. Well, this weekend, the former Bank of England Governor Mervyn King declared that it was better for business to just get on and do it, the it being Brexit, rather than prolong the agony of not knowing. Is he right? We went to speak to one business owner in Ashford in Kent to ask how the uncertainty is affecting her.
My name is Chris Wolfe, and with my husband Nick, we run South East Flowers here in Ashford, Kent, and we have so for 10 years. It's very difficult because you're trying to plan. You can't drive the bus and drive it where you want to anymore. You can't think about reinvesting or anything like that. Because there's so much uncertainty of a deal or a no deal, we don't know what the charges are going to be. We're guessing at the moment. You've got the exchange rate that could be hit. Then you've got the paperwork that has to be done in Holland and the paperwork that has to be done over here to get that shipment across. Now, both of those companies will be charging somebody, and it will come to us and then on to the consumer. I don't think that anybody sitting in the House of Commons will be affected by a deal or a no deal like everybody else who's working hard. But they have our future in their hands. We will manage. You know, we will get the flowers in, we will get the flowers out, we will not let our customers down. But if I mismanage this company like they were mismanaging all this thing that they've had plenty of time to organise it, why does it have to go to the wire? So everything's kind of static at the minute. You're just kind of going day by day by day and talking about the same thing and listening to the radio and watching the telly to find out if there's anything new. I had a bottle of champagne at home on Saturday just waiting, hoping it would be a deal just as everything settles down. I understand they've got to look at the deal. I get all that, but why are they doing it now rather than in March, you know?
Views of one florist in Kent. Well, we're joined now from Belfast by Ivor Ferguson, President of the Ulster Farmers Union. And here in the studio with me is the businessman, Labour donor and former Vote Leave chair, John Mills. Ivor, if I can just go to you, because I know you backed Theresa May's deal. You were behind that. Do you feel the same about this one?
No, certainly not. For us, Theresa May's deal was certainly a very good deal. This deal we have at the moment, we realise that it is a compromise. It certainly gets over the tariffs on the border, which is a very big issue for us. And we did welcome this deal, but we certainly couldn't support it because it has thrown up a lot of questions that we would need clarity on.
So when you said thrown up questions, I mean, one was the issue the Brexit Secretary himself couldn't answer today, that goods from Northern Ireland to Great Britain or to the mainland would have to produce more paperwork in the form of what they call an exit declaration. Would that affect you? Is that doable?
Well, certainly we have always stated that what we need is free and unfettered access to the GB mainland market, which is our mainland market by far. But our second biggest market, of course, is the EU, and we certainly want free access to the EU as well. So if there's checks to be had or to be put in place for us going into the GB market, that would, to me, would not be unfettered access.
So you wouldn't see it as, well, we've got the best of both worlds. We're actually perfectly positioned.
Well, I suppose we'll have to, I mean, we realise that this deal today is a compromise deal, and we have always said that whereas Theresa May's was the best deal so far, if we look at the alternative, which is no deal, that would be devastating for us. You know, it would really result in market failure and bankruptcies and farmers. So if we had to face those tariffs going south of the border. So if we look at the deal today, it's an awful lot better than no deal. But certainly we would need clarity. We have a number of questions that we need answers to. And I suppose apart from the unfettered access to the GB market, one of the main questions we have is that we have a lot of product goes from Northern Ireland, particularly raw milk. and that's manufactured into powders, which go to, there's 52 trade deals which the EU has negotiated. So we would need access to those trade deals, and so far we haven't been able to get clarity on that. So that's a very important point as well that we need clarification on.
Ivor, thank you very much. Ivor Ferguson there from Belfast. John Mills, that was one business who didn't sound at all convinced that this was going to be an easy ride. You've heard what he said there. He needs raw milk going to 52 different markets, 52 different bits of trade access to get that done. I mean, that's not frictionless.
It's not completely frictionless, but I must say my experience of international trade is that paperwork takes some getting used to, but in the end, once you've got it organised, especially if you've got computers where it's all down and you've just got to replicate what was there before, isn't that difficult.
But it's so funny, isn't it, to think that, you know, there was such an immense excitement about this bonfire of regulation and getting rid of the paperwork and the red, you know, tape, and what are they doing? They're creating even more.
Well, I don't think filling in one of two forms is a desperate case of regulation.
Well, the DUP, of course, will say it's not just filling in one or two forms, it's what that intrinsically and emotionally means about identity between Northern Ireland and the mainland.
I think that's right, and I understand entirely where the DUP are, and I think that what we can do to keep the union together is very important. But I mean, there just are some differences between Northern Ireland and the rest of the GP, as we've seen on the Stormont events today. And I think you just got to recognise that. I mean, it's impossible to get a deal together which is going to satisfy everybody.
People are talking a lot about compromise, and I understand there is a need for compromise, but there is no guarantee, as I was saying earlier, for workers' rights in this deal. Now, you're a Labour man, you're a donor to the Labour Party. Doesn't that freak you out?
It's not great, I must say. I'd be much happier if there were these declarations in, and there are other things which we're concerned about on the agreement. But any agreement that you have is going to have compromises and...
But is that really where... You're a Labour donor and you're saying, well, we've got to compromise on something, so let's make it workers' right.
Well, I don't think that is right, in the sense that I think it's actually very unlikely that even a Conservative government, even a relatively right-wing Conservative government, I don't think would erode workers' rights to any significant extent, because it's so unpopular.
Why would the General Secretary of the TUC say this is a licence to rip up people's rights? Why would she say that she'd been told by Michael Gove that he was not prepared to guarantee to preserve workers' rights? This is the TUC speaking.
Well, Francois O'Grady has a role, and I understand exactly where she's coming from.
But isn't
she's trying
she
to make
on your
point.
side?
Yes, she is.
She's pointing out to you what she is really concerned about, and you're a Labour donor.
Yeah, but you've got to look at these things in the round and accept some derogations and steps that you don't like.
Maybe prefer deregulation. Maybe that would work for your business, would it?
Yes, I think businesses don't like regulation generally, but you just have to put up with it. But I mean, I think that supporting this deal is very much a question of taking a view on balance against a whole lot of advantages and disadvantages as to whether it's worth going for. And I think on balance, it is.
Thank you both. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks, John.